On Sunday, December the 2nd, 2007, at around 8 am in the morning, Jason Wenger, originally from Brighton, was warming up his SUV in Anchorage. He was completely unaware that watching him was an unhinged maniac, a man that had already committed a shocking murder the day before and was now on the prowl in Anchorage. 27-year-old Wenger was seeking a master's degree in creative writing at the University of Alaska in Anchorage and was considering seeking a doctorate at Denver University. He was raised in Brighton by his mother Deborah. Sadly, his father passed away years earlier in a weightlifting accident. Those who knew him would describe him as a fun-loving guy who didn't take himself too seriously. He was also someone who bent over backwards to help other people, someone with a big heart who had no known enemies. Jason was currently helping disabled adults find jobs. He had previously earned a bachelor's degree at the University of Colorado in psychology and creative writing, and had hoped to become a college professor. He would never get that chance. As Jason sat there in his Ford Bronco, his car idling and trying to get warm on that typically cold day in Anchorage, he was blissfully unaware of the danger that was creeping up on him. Within seconds, shots rung out, and Jason was shot 8 times. He slumped over, his foot pressing on the accelerator. The man had originally intended on taking Jason's car, but fearful of the noise the shocking crime had created, he ran off into the woods. A neighbour walking his dog discovered Wenger's body at 10:30 am. His murder initially stumped authorities. Who would want to kill the young college student on his way to church? The senseless crime made no sense. But at this point, the crime spree was just getting started. A cold-blooded killer was on the loose in Anchorage, and his only intention now was to kill as many people as possible. He would strike again in a matter of hours. At around 7:20 p.m, 33-year-old Liz Rumsey, a law clerk for the Alaska Supreme Court, was walking along the Chester Creek Trail near a quiet upper-middle-class neighbourhood north of Westchester Lagoon. As she was talking on the phone, she crossed paths with a tall, thin man who she said made her nervous. The man asked her for the time, and after she responded, she quickened her pace to leave the area. Unfortunately, the man only had one thing on his mind. She was shot in the back multiple times as she tried to walk away. The perpetrator headed off into the woods, leaving Liz fighting for her life. As she fell to the ground, she lost the grip on her phone, but she called out to the friend with whom she'd been talking to and told her she'd been shot. Residents also heard the gunshots and called police. Miraculously, Liz was still conscious and was able to describe the lone assailant to the police. As law enforcement swarmed to the area, the man hid in the woods, keeping a watchful eye on what was going on. Once again, it would only be a few hours before he was ready to strike again. That following morning at approximately 7 am, 43-year-old Thomas Deek, an architect, was getting ready to leave for work. Once again, the morning was extremely cold, so he turned on the engine and sat in his Jeep, waiting for it to warm up. But once again, he was being watched. When Deek stepped out of his Jeep, he was shot 6 times. Not content with that, he was then beat around the head with the butt of the gun. This time, the killer left in the vehicle, but miraculously, Deek was also still alive. Clinging to life, he lay silent in his own driveway. One of the bullets had punctured his lung. He tried to call his wife, who was still inside in bed, but he couldn't draw enough breath to speak. His wife heard the gunshots but thought they were fireworks. Somehow he managed to muster the strength, despite his critical injuries, to call 911, and law enforcement arrived within minutes. Deke described his assailant as very thin, bearded and dressed in a dark blue jumpsuit with a hood. Deke, in his role as an architect, was extremely good with attention to detail, and with the aid of his description, police were able to put the cases together. But the description also pointed to another crime, a crime that happened a couple of days earlier in the town of Palmer, approximately 45 miles away from Anchorage, a crime that started it all, and one that was so shocking and brutal, police knew the man responsible had to be stopped immediately and at all costs. Law enforcement now pulled resources from all departments. They knew the name of the man they were looking for, and they knew the vehicle he was now driving. They also knew how dangerous he was. Christopher Aaron Rogers and his girlfriend Ellen were throwing a party in their Palmer, Alaska home. The couple were celebrating their 1-year anniversary. Chris's son, Christopher Aaron Rogers Jr., 28, was living with the pair. Aaron Jr. had a troubled past, having numerous arrests against his name, his latest for a DUI, but the couple were hoping having the stability around him would lead to a brighter future, and it appeared to be working. Aaron helped around the house with construction, painting and yard work, and for the party he helped Ellen buying groceries and preparing his favourite meal, homemade pizza. Ellen and Chris also discussed their planned wedding. Aaron volunteered to organise the flower arrangements. The fourth member of the family was Bear, Chris's dog. Weighing 150 pounds, Bear was very loyal to Chris and never left his side. The pair would go everywhere together. If Chris went to get the groceries, Bear was in the front seat alongside him. The party was a success. Everyone seemed to have a good time, and after the party finished, Chris and Ellen went to bed. Erin remained in the living room watching TV. As the night wore on, Ellen was struggling to sleep, and it appeared the same was the case with 28-year-old Erin, as she listened to him go in and out of the house several times. She assumed for a cigarette. When she woke again, this time at 4:20 a.m, she could still hear the television was on. She considered getting out of bed to tell him to turn it off and go to sleep, but decided not to. A few minutes later though, the chaos that would destroy many lives was about to begin. Ellen froze as a shadowy figure walked into their bedroom. It was too dark to make out the individual's features, but she could see the person holding something long and slender in his hand. She originally thought the object was something like a stick, and when the dark figure started hitting Chris with what she thought was a stick, she was scared and confused, but she reached over to grab the object and stop the blows raining down on Chris. But after two of her fingertips fell from her hand, she realised the attacker gripped a machete, not a stick. In shock and fear for her and Chris's life, she also feared for Erin, what had happened to him in the living room. But in a flash of horror, she realised the man hitting Chris repeatedly with the machete was Chris's son, Erin. Ellen paused, asking Erin what he was doing and why he was raining blows on his father. His response was, "You made me do it." At this point, she assumed Chris was no longer alive. However, in a sudden rush, Chris rose from his bed and lurched at Erin, picking him up off the floor and hurling him into the kitchen. It was here Chris sadly succumbed to his injuries. With his father dead, Erin now turned his attention to Ellen. She hurried to the bathroom, shutting the door, but with her fingertips missing, she was unable to lock the door. Terrified and knowing she had no way to fight back, she waited, and then he burst through the door, striking her over and over with the machete. With her life drifting away and no one to save her, she told him, "You have killed us. You can stop now." And suddenly the blows stopped. It wasn't her words that had stopped him though. It was Bear, Chris's huge dog. Bear had gripped Erin's pants in his teeth and pulled him away from Ellen. Erin was now going to turn his rage onto the dog, but Bear viciously chased Erin out the house. He jumped into his father's pickup and sped away. Meanwhile, back in the house, miraculously, Ellen managed to lock the bathroom door with her teeth and dial 911 with her engagement ring. When the troopers arrived at Chris and Ellen's home, they found pools of blood everywhere. The scene of the crime was gruesome. Ellen was barely alive, but she managed to tell investigators it was Erin who had attacked them, and if he was in Chris's truck, he was now armed with more than a machete. Chris had decided to keep his gun in the truck, as he thought it was safer than leaving it in the house. So Erin was now armed, and at this point no one knew where he was heading. Outside the property, the troopers found bloody paw prints in the snow, and when they followed them, they discovered Bear, whining in pain. The dog also had been hit by the machete and was missing a canine tooth and had a 6-inch gash in his chin, but the dog was still alive. Back in Anchorage, police were aware of the domestic crime in Palmer, and were aware troopers were still searching for the assailant. They knew to be on the lookout for the missing vehicle, but they did not understand the brutality of the Palmer crime, nor the unhinged individual who had committed it. They also had no idea the vicious killer had driven to Anchorage, had a gun, and was looking for his next victim. But having attacked his latest victim in his driveway and taken his car, now all the pieces had come together. Knowing who they were looking for and the vehicle he was driving, it did not take long for law enforcement to have sight of the vehicle. As police approached, there was a strong feeling Erin was not going to surrender quietly, and he wasn't. When he was pulled over, Erin pulled out his weapon and pulled the trigger. The weapon jammed, and Erin was arrested. With the suspect now in custody, officers wanted to try and understand his motive and what drove him to the madness he was going to inflict over the 2-day period. Rogers blamed the killings on aliens, clarifying the voices told him to do it. He went on to say that his family treated him like a slave and an idiot, but his father's killing was nothing personal. He also said had he not been caught, many more people would have lost their lives at his hands. Although his lawyers argued he was clearly not in his right mind at the time of the attacks, the jury disagreed. He was found guilty and sentenced to nearly 500 years in prison. For those who lost loved ones and those attacked, the traumatic events over that weekend will live on. Bear, the dog, was awarded a medal for his bravery that day. Sadly, the dog would pass away less than 2 years later through cancer. He passed away peacefully, surrounded by love, on the lap of Ellen, the woman whose life he undoubtedly saved that fateful night.